Hello, hello. Good afternoon, and welcome to another very special installment of Book Passages Conversations with Authors. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. I often host events just like this one, as well as organizing and moderating special author panel events for social justice. Thank you so much for supporting today's event and all our events, whether it's in-person or virtual, which, by the way, we are starting to do some in-person events. Just check out our website. And if you live in the Bay Area, please stop by. Otherwise, you can always see us online. And we have a full list at bookpassage.com. We do appreciate your support with these events. And also, audience members, remember you can access the chat to submit any questions or comments you have about today's events. We do welcome that and appreciate you doing that. And today's event is special because I'm so honored to host and promote a very special debut memoir by Danté Stewart. And his in-conversation partner is Off the Hook, a friend of Book Passage. But let's start with Dante. Dante's debut author of just released memoir, Shoutin in the Fire, which gives breathtaking language to his reckoning with the legacy of white supremacy, both on a broad social level as well as a more intimate personal level. Stewart uses his personal experiences as a vehicle to reclaim and reimagine spiritual virtues like rage, resilience, and remembrance, and explores how these virtues might function as a work of love against unjust, unloving world. Stewart reveals both his profound faith and discovered even after experienced the violence of the American church, a faith that loves. Dante is a speaker and a writer whose work in the areas race, religion, and politics has been featured on CNN and in the Washington Post and Christianity Today and many other outlets. In conversation with him, as mentioned, is Robert Jones Jr. This is now his third Book Passage event in just this year. So that's why we say he's an official friend of the store. We love having him on. Robert is a writer from New York who has written for numerous publications, including the New York Times, Essence, and the Paris Review. He is the creator and curator of the social justice social media community, Son of Baldwin. And his brilliant debut novel, The Prophets, which was just released at the beginning of this year, was selected for Book Passage's first edition club and is now shortlisted for the National Book Award. Please welcome to the virtual Book Passage stage, Robert Jones Jr. and Danté Stewart. Take it away.
Danté Stewart, I am so happy and blessed to be here with you, brother. And I was hoping before we got started in our conversation that you would bless us with a few words from Shoutin in the Fire, an American epistle, which is one of the most electrifying memoirs I have ever read. The language puts you up there with our spiritual godparents, Morrison and Baldwin. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Danté Stewart.
Well, thank you, brother. And thank you to Book Passage for opening up the door for little young dude from South Carolina to be able to share space with one of the most brilliant, amazing Black voices today, Robert Jones. So I was giving an interview, like I said, another event. They asked me, hey, you talk about your mother, you talk about your grandmother, you talk about your granddaddy, you talk about your daddy, aunties and uncles, them and everybody. And the interviewer was like, yo, let's choose somebody to start with. And so if anybody has been following me or know me, they know that I love my grandmama a lot. My grandma is amazing. So that's why I'm gonna start today. I'm gonna start with my grandmother and a conversation that we had in little old country town in South Carolina. So here we go. Grandma, I said, as I fixed some tea and sat at the table, a lot of people are talking about how this country is great. Great for who? Great for us. I don't know about that, she responded. Me either. I said, like most Black folk her age, she keeps a picture of President Obama, Michelle, Malia, and Sasha in their living room. It is big. It is beautiful. It sits next to a picture of who, as a kid, I always thought to be Dr. J, the basketball player. It sits near my grandfather's awards. I wonder if it's a reminder of Black people's deep love for ourselves, our art, our sports, our country. Barack is in his black suit, white shirt, blue tie. Michelle is in her dress the color of a flower, a deep and abiding red like roses with shiny pearls around her neck. The children, like children just like us. For some, he represented a sellout, somebody who didn't stand up for Black people when they needed it most. For others, Obama represented them losing the country they thought was theirs, a sort of symbol of the destruction of white supremacy. Still for others, he represented our shining prince, the resurrection of Black racial politics, part Malcolm, part Martin, part sermon, part prayer. Still for others, he represented just another nigga who made it, nothing more and nothing less. I pointed to the picture and asked her how it made her feel. God is good, Dante, she said. God is good. I agreed. We both knew that though this is America and America stayed on fire, God was still in the midst of it all. God hadn't left us. God's work was worth remembering. In her words, we're still here. And if we're still here, then we were worth spending time talking about and listening to and repeating over and again in hopes that things would change and that we would feel love and that we would feel hope when hope felt as elusive as liberation. Our bodies, she reminded me, are our gospel. Our memories are our weapons. Maybe that is what makes memory so powerful. It is the unbreakable cord that binds the pains of the past to the problems of the present and the possibilities of the future. My grandmother, finding her way to be a country Black feminist through her rough, greasy hands and through her dark brown eyes, taught me that remembering is not just about remembering what happened to us. It was also about remembering the story bound to her body. The kitchen table was not just a kitchen table. It was not just a home for pots and pans, old grease and white flour, trash cans, and a half-working refrigerator. It was a sacred place, a sanctuary of survival, a place where we told our story on our own. Though she never got to step foot in the pulpit as a preacher in the Pentecostal church, she was, while we were talking and sitting, God's preacher. The God she found leaped off the pages of Black Bibles into her frail body. She found God in the singing. She found God in the cooking, in Sunday morning praise and worship, in dancing, in stillness and in rest, in her grandkids, in her lineage, in her testament to survival. This was her story. This was her witness. She had something to tell, something to say with her mouth and her body and with her hands and with her eyes. What I heard that day calling back to me was revelation that would keep me going in the midst of chaos. Greasy hands, frail bodies, happy hearts, unsweet tea, unsalted fried chicken, imagination, dreaming, memories, flooding, engulfing her, engulfing me, engulfing us together. She rarely likes to talk about it, she says, but she remembers.
Thank you for that testimony, Brother Dante. Before I get started in asking you this bunch of questions that I have for you, I want to make a land acknowledgement. I am from Brooklyn, New York, and this is the land of the Lenape and Canarsie people, who were the indigenous peoples who lived here and whose land I live upon. So I want to thank them and their descendants for allowing me to be here. And I'd also like to give a special shout out to our ancestors who sacrificed so that we might be here. So you have a really interesting story that a lot of people might not know. At one point, you were a college football player.
Yeah.
At Clemson, right?
Yeah.
How does a college football player at Clemson become a writer?
through trials and tribulations. What's interesting is that, I always, had an affinity for words, whether that's from when I was a young kid, and sitting around in my own house. My mom still to this day, I was at home not too long ago, and trying to get this to take it back with me to Augusta, Georgia. She has on her inside the living room on like the little mantle joint. She has copies of Black books, and I wanted to take Margaret Walker's Jubilee, but she wouldn't let me take it. And so, as a kid, I was surrounded by words, whether that be the words from my mother and my father, or whether that be the words from preachers, or whether that be the words that we said against one another as children, as we both played on the courts and oftentimes fought in the street. We were all surrounded by words. And in college, I loved learning and things like that, but I was more concerned about football. And so once I left college, and things started to happen, it really forced me into reading. For me, reading was a way that, I made sense of my trauma. It was a way that I healed. It was a way, almost Toni Morrison, as she was talking about Black autobiographies in her 1974 New York Times piece. It was almost like growing up Black one more time. And so for me, like the same way that I approached a playbook, as if like so much of my standing on the field depended on my ability to be immersed in this particular jargon, in this particular language, in this particular framework, so much of reading and books became the same way for me, that so much depended on my ability to be able to be baptized and engulfed in the language of Black folk, to help me kind of make sense of so much of the trauma that I was facing as I left college and ended up in white evangelical spaces, very deeply invested in those spaces, or in some sense to just kind of make sense of, what does it mean at the heart of my book, to be Black and American and Christian. And so out of so much of that struggle of making sense of myself and my experiences, the worst that I became and the best that I became, writing, first through journaling, became a place for freedom where I could just be myself, where I could just say whatever I want to say. I can curse and I can pray, I can reflect on literature. I can also write dreams and things like that. And then over time, I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it in the same way that I approach football, particularly as it relates to, practicing and approaching my craft and skill set, is much of the same way that I approach writing and practicing, realizing the value of it, that it's like kind of intrinsically woven into my identity now. And so, how does a football player become a writer? You just keep on living in some sense.
All right, I see that. So in some ways, the spirit was always in you, to carry words in whichever way. And this is, it led you to being a scribe of sorts, to tell this particular story, Shoutin in the Fire. How long did it take you to write it?
Well, and the crazy part was, man, I was already kind of like I was almost kind of already writing my book, just because I was just like writing essays after essay. I was just like to this day, I'll write something, I'll send it to you, I'll send it to Disha, I'll send it to Kiese, and I send it to Jason. I'll be like, hey, yo, I wrote something up, y'all check this out, whatnot. So, I was always just I was always kind of in some sense writing my book, but on a logistic level, I started the actual writing process last August. Then I ended up getting COVID in October. And that threw me off for like 3 weeks. Couldn't think, I was sick, or when I was kind of hard to kind of get back in the rhythm, and threw off my rhythm. My sleeping was messed up. Then once I kind of got my bearings back together, then I had a due date of December 1st. And then I turned it in, I think the second week of December. And then the revisions took about another 6 months. And then boom, we finally got a finished book. And it was an incredibly taxing process, because life is already full, being a husband, being a father. I'm literally at school right now, being a student, being a minister. It took a lot of discipline. It took a lot of, hard work, but also it took y'all believing in me. that I would not have made that, I would not have completed this text had I not had you and others like rooting for me, thinking about me, helping me, like pushing me, believing in me. So yeah, it took that long, but it took a lot more people, to get me to the finish line.
We need our village, bro. That's how it is. We need our village. There's no such thing as self-made.
Indeed.
That's one of the greatest lies ever told, is self-made.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned something that I want to kind of follow up on, which is, so how do you balance writing with being a husband, a father, a student, and a preacher?
Yeah. I'll first say is that, you got to know how to take your L's. So like every day, like for real, like there are going to be L's that I take every single day as it relates to those roles. But I also have a system. I read James Clear's Atomic Habits last year, and it really shaped how I thought about my life. And every day when I wake up, I have literally, it's to my left right now, I have my planner and I have my journal. And my planner and my journal, really guide my framework of living. Every single hour is planned, and every single day from 6 o'clock to 6 p.m. And after 6 p.m., my brain shut off. I'm done. I'm with my babies. I'm with my wife. I'm chilling. I'm watching something on Netflix or something. But from 6 to 6, every single hour is planned. And out of that planning, is this central question: what is the person I want to become going to accomplish today? And I list those roles. I list, hey, somebody who wants to be healthy and fit as best I can, somebody who's a husband and a father, somebody who's a writer, who's a student and a scholar, pastor, leader. And I weave those roles. What can I get done just to get, 1% better? I weave that, try and take wins wherever I can, and embrace my L's, and realize, as James Clear say, he says, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So the only way that I'm able, in some sense, to get this done is grace, that, I believe that the Spirit of the Lord and the ancestors, give us a measure of, grace to keep on going in the midst of the madness. But also, we need some structure as well. And one of the things that I've learned is that, like, if I can have structure, then I can get a little bit more done in each day than if I didn't know what was coming. And so I weave writing within my own framework every day. I'm doing some type of writing, every day or every other day or whatnot, just to kind of work on the craft.
I wonder how closely linked because you showed me your planner and it was meticulously organized. Like every hour you had something to do or something to write or something to say or someplace to go. And I was just thinking to myself, like, oh my goodness. So I wonder, do you structure?
This is my planner. This is my planner.
Do you structure your writing in the same way? Whereas like you build this architecture that you plan out, or does it just come straight out of your spirit?
Nah, it comes straight out of my spirit and my belly. That's why I struggle with academic writing, is because I'm not really good at structure in a sense of like outlining and things like that. I'm just not an outliner. I don't preach as an outliner. I preach with kind of thematic, as my pastor kind of showed me, I preach thematically in the sense of I have principles. I have relevant questions. I have these ideas that's woven into how I think about, my own approach to it. And like writing, it's just like that. I like, I want to take something, I want it to like free flow. I wanted to come out of my kind of creative genius. Not saying that like, structure and outlines inhibit creativity. But for me, I like to be able to take the writing wherever it goes. So like yesterday or 2 days ago, I was reading Disha's Secret Lives and that chapter, how to make love to a physicist. And I just was like, I wrote this essay called Hallelujah Anyhow. That starts with the question, how do you teach a Black boy how to be a Black man? And I wanted to write this creative essay by ending, by ending it, crescendo in it at the end with me actually reading Disha's book and that being the end of my essay. I didn't know how I was going to get there. I knew where I wanted to end up. I didn't know how I was going to get there. And I feel like for me as a writer, that allows me to be able to let, my creative imagination take it wherever it wants, and things like that. So yeah, no, I'm not that type of person as a writer. No, I can't do that.
You talk about Hallelujah Anyhow, which you sent to me, and I still have to read.
Oh, you're good.
But it reminds me of something that you talk about in Shoutin, where on page 146 you say, Black boys learn sexism, toxic masculinity, homophobia, and self-shame real early. We are caught between words that wound our spirits and systems that wound our bodies. We never really learn how to use our bodies, how to love our bodies, how to see that our bodies carry both glory and guilt, a complexity I'm still trying to wrap my mind around. We learn how to judge the worth and the value of other Black boys by how well we can approximate to standards of maleness that none of us can really fully achieve. We know this. That, when I encounter like big truths, like my heart like feels so like it's about to burst, because that is what patriarchy does to men, right? 100%. It tells us our value is in all of these other things, how strong we are, how much money we make, how protective we are, all of these things, but it never tells us you have value because you're here. So we act in these toxic ways. We can't even form normal friendships because patriarchy tells us the only emotion we're allowed to have is anger, such that we can't even have brotherhood. And I don't want to make this all Black men, but I'm hoping that there's some sort of awakening such that we turn away from those toxic ideals that everybody wants us to hold. Everybody wants the Black man to behave a particular kind of way. I hope we let go of that so that we could finally embrace our humanity and our own internal softness,
Yeah, 100%.
You also recently published a modified excerpt from your book in the New York Times. It's one page, it's on page 115 in your book.
Yes.
And one part in particular struck me like lightning. If the white people I worshiped with and went to school with and had dinner with had the imagination to see C.S. Lewis's Aslan the Lion in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as Jesus, then I knew there should have been no problem when Black people said Jesus was Black and Jesus loved Black people and Jesus wanted to see Black people free. But I found out that many could see the symbol of divine goodness and love in an animal before they could ever see the symbol of divine goodness and love in Blackness. Have mercy. What do you believe whiteness, or embracing the concept of whiteness either as identity or as a way of life, does to the human being?
Brilliant. Whew. Brilliant question. I think first and foremost, I think whiteness consumes us in ways that are incredibly harmful. For whiteness, especially the ways in which it functions on the level of religion. And even when we're thinking about the history of colonialism and Christianity as woven together as a fundamental expression of whiteness, woven together, that it wants to control, dismember, destroy, devalue, and totalize its kind of power over people, over bodies, over imaginations, over land, over boundaries, over borders. And so on one level, what does whiteness do to us? In a word, to kind of flip Jesus' statement in a reverse, if Jesus comes to give life, as he said in John 10:10, then what whiteness does is it comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. If we think about our humanity and, our creativity and our complexity, whiteness in history and even today, and in some sense, the institutions which we inherit that are a byproduct of whiteness, whether you're talking about predominantly white institutions, whether you're talking about many of the ways in which we think about, the body politic, many of the ways we think about literature, many of the ways we think about art and creativity and religion. The world we have inherited is a world in which white people and the performance of their whiteness has stolen so much, has killed so much, and destroyed so much. So that's what it first and foremost fundamentally does to us. But the question I think, you're brilliantly asking is not just what does whiteness do to us in general, but what does whiteness do to the Black us in particular? And when I think about that question, then we have to wrestle with the ways in which whiteness gives both justification and gives power, and it evades anti-Blackness. Because in some sense, whiteness is so bound to these ideas of what is moral, what is right, and what is true. And so when we think about when I was even writing about maleness and masculinity and Blackness and Black boys and Black men, in some sense, what I was trying to do creatively and narratively was deconstruct this kind of toxic masculinity and patriarchy that's bound much to these kind of Victorian ideas of masculinity, which are bound to whiteness, which are bound to white ways of reading the Bible, white ways of understanding the Bible, and things like that. So what does whiteness do to us? It still kills and destroys. But for us as Black people in particular, what it does to us is it, in some sense, allows us to escape our humanity and evade it while also devaluing it and decentering it. This is actually much of the problem. I think Baldwin, we both have this mutual affinity for Baldwin. When Baldwin, we were talking about this the other day, when Baldwin writes in The Fire Next Time, in a letter from a region in my mind, when he says, if the concept of God is to have any validity, then it is to make us larger. It is to make us more loving. And if this concept of God cannot do this, then it's time to get rid of it. And I think what Baldwin is saying in this sense, Baldwin is talking about white conceptions of God in this moment, because he comes off talking about colonialism and Christianity, but he's also wrapping this kind of alternate way of being in the world in criticism of the ways in which Black people hated ourselves, which were bound to religion, which was bound to his Pentecostal upbringing. He did not just simply learn self-hatred and self-disrespect and self-loathing and self-depreciation from whiteness and what the white world made him and his family, as he writes in the first half of this book. But he also is deconstructing the ways in which we are bound to this idea that Black people must be perfect. We must be in performance. We must be in pain in order for us to be loved and be free. And so for me, I think whiteness does all that to us, but I think so much of what we do to ourselves are also bound to these ideas of whiteness that for me in the book, I wanted to address that head on, particularly, what did whiteness do to me as an athlete in college? Well, it made me work for work for white protection and white acceptance and white rewards. What did it do to me in the white church? In some sense, it gave me power and justification to choosing white people over my Black wife. It made me callous to the deaths of Black people, those who were Black LGBTQ. It gave me power to evade and to deny and render those bodies and identities invisible. And what did it do to me in some sense when I looked at Black literature? It made me think that Black people and what we create were footnotes in white people's stories. Ooh, and so I think for us, in order for us, to really wrestle with, who we are as human beings and who we are as Black people, then we have to ask ourselves that question, not just simply what has whiteness done in the world, but what has whiteness wrought in the Black world, and how can we get free of it as best we can, little by little, day by day.
So you just gonna drop a sermon on us in the middle of a discussion, huh? Because you had the preacher rhythms in there and everything else. Okay, I see you. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit. Later in the book, you talk about your grandfather and a time when he was lost and then he was found as per your mother's intuition by the riverside, page 200. He was suffering from dementia, but when your mother asked him to sing her a song, he lit up and sang a hymn about prayer. That reminded me a great deal of an episode of 60 Minutes that I just saw where Tony Bennett, also suffering from dementia, finds his way in music. Your book has its own music, the rhythm of the sentences, arrangements of the recollections. Do you think that is how it might help you to find your way?
Yes, indeed. You know, I oftentimes retell the story, particularly of me being inside of the white church and what happened when I first encountered the literature and the life of James Baldwin. I was, you know, preaching a sermon and leading and teaching and things like that. And then, you know, the shootings happened in 2016 and Donald Trump happened. And I was not the hero of the story. I was not the Black person who, you know, when the shootings happened and Donald Trump happened, I was just like, you know, leaving these spaces. It took me a long time to leave those spaces because I was so invested. I mean, it took my wife and many others to show me a different way, to show me a better way, to criticize me and be honest and be willing to say, in some sense, that like, you know, you choose your way and we're going to go our own way, you know, and you're going to, in some sense, become what you are and what you want, but you won't have us in the process. You won't have us there with you. And so there was this one meeting with my friend Drew Hall, white brother Drew Hall, and he's like, yo, I need you, I think you're going to enjoy this book. Now, Drew Hall, big husky white brother from Georgia. I mean, big brother, big dude from Georgia. And he gives me a book and it's Martin Luther King's Where Do We Go From Here? Then Martin quotes Baldwin's Fire Next Time, where he says that, you know, do remember, these are Baldwin words, that do remember what they think about you and what they cause you to endure is not a testament to your own inferiority, but a testament to their own inhumanity and their fear. And so when I think about like how I got free, because I remember, like in some sense, for me, that was like the dungeon shaking. And that's in some sense why I call the book Shouting in the Fire, because that moment was like it was almost as if my own dungeon shook, the chains fell off, and there was a certain type of ingesting of the Black spirit, you know, the Black ethos, the ancestral dream, and the beauty of the words that travel across time and land and bodies. When I read Baldwin was as powerful as the words of Jesus. That Baldwin's words in some sense became gospel to me as a young Black man in this white church in the white racist South. You know, Baldwin in some sense made me come alive in the same ways that Jesus, when he touched bodies, when he touched broken hearts, and when he touched broken stories, were able to put them back together again. And so for me, Baldwin became like that. So like when I think about my mama and my granddaddy in that moment of intuition and my own aspect of freedom, the same ways in which my mama heard the whisper. Oh man, this is good. The same way I heard my mama heard the whispering of returning, go back to the river, is the same way I hear the whisper continually coming up from the Black text telling me to go back, to return. And it reminds me, Audre Lorde has this beautiful, beautiful quote in Sister Outsider in that text, in that essay, Poetry is Not a Luxury. She writes, the white fathers told us, I think, therefore I am. But the Black mother within us, the poet, whispers in our dream, I feel, therefore I can be free. And so what Audre Lorde is doing in this moment is she's telling us that the white fathers standing outside of us as this objective authority that is not among us, that is not within us, that is not around us, but that stands over us, tells us, I think, therefore I am. They just want us to call back words and phrases and things like that. But the Black mother, the poet, being willing to move and shape within our own stories, being willing to move and shake around our bodies and stand within us and amongst us. The poet whispers in our dreams so that when we wake up, we pay attention to what we feel. What happened? Don't make yourself the hero. Be honest about what you happened. What them white people did to you, it hurt. What you became, it hurt others. But you feel, and you're human. And if you're human, and you can get free, and you listen to me, the Black mother within you, then you can get better. And I think at the heart of my book, what I was trying to do, and with my granddaddy and my grandma, and listening to the whisper, was me trying to be more mature, more loving, more honest, more vulnerable, better than I could be before.
All right. Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm back in church.
And like Baldwin left the church, but he might have left the pulpit. The pulpit never left him.
That's true in very many ways.
Yeah.
So then that opens up this question. Is there room for arguments about whether Black people should be practicing Christianity at all, since the vast majority of us, we received it as a result of the violence of colonialism?
Oh, yes, without question. I think, and this is so much of kind of around the work that I'm doing right now. And I'm even thinking about Sean Crawley and his beautiful, brilliant book, Black Pentecostal Breath, where he talks about theology and philosophy and the ways in which these concepts and constructs were often tied to a sort of type of anti-Blackness that disconnected us from our epistemologies, from our ways of knowing and thinking and being in the world. And so I think in some sense, I don't even think, in a sense, the possibility or even the possibility. I think the necessity of critiquing ways of faith and Christianity that is oftentimes, in some sense, told those who were Black, Native, and Indigenous that our worlds were less than, that the way we shaped the world was less than, and that when the white man showed up, then our connection to the divine and to ourselves showed up. And I think that still, in some sense, betrays the brilliance that so many of us, from as Black, Indigenous, Native folk, the ways in which we shape the world and build the world. So yes, I think that we should, and there are many actually critiquing these aspects in which colonialism and Christianity are so bound together, in the ways in which Christianity, is not just simply, a passive actor in the kind of devaluing of Black humanity and the kind of Black worlds that we build, or the connection to our ancestors, but oftentimes Christianity is the active denier, that it is the active agent of the ways in which we are devalued, the ways in which, our worlds are seen as less than. And so for me, in my own work, the way that I kind of resist these narratives, even as I'm in, theological education, I personally, I tell people, I want to expand the canon in a sense. You have the literary canon of Black thinkers and the Black intellectual tradition and the Black literary tradition, but we also have the Black religious tradition. When I think about the ways in which those who were enslaved, when the enslavers came and had people, even Black people, come and preach their sermons, that the enslaved were able to have this sort of as this brilliant brother, I can't recall his name right now, the brilliant brother from Harvard calls it fugitive pedagogy, that we're taking back what, was stolen from us, that our ability to name ourselves, our ability to name our worlds and act within our world. So I want to lean into the tradition of being connected to the ancestors, just like those in the Hebrew Bible thought of their ancestors as carrying the divine, of carrying sacred meaning. For me, as a theologian, as somebody who's doing theological work, who's doing ministry, I want to take seriously reading Black texts as sacred texts, reading Black lives as sacred history, that I don't want to just approach the biblical story, as many people say, basic instructions before leaving earth. That's too much of that's a too pure narrative. there's no such thing as purity in the Bible. There are things that I want to hold on to, things that I generate meaning in, but there are also things that have been used as justification against us, as just like Howard Thurman's grandmother, that I have to say, that's not useful to me. And so I need to be able, as they did, have the people names that I can utilize and see that there is something in the fabric of their story, something in the fabric of their testimonies that can be divine revelation, that can teach me about life and about God and something about the world that we live in. So I want to receive these names as I received Nehemiah and Isaiah. I want to say that there is something in the book of Baldwin. There's something in the book of Tony. There's something in the book of Alice. There's something in the book of Gail Jones and Nikki Giovanni and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Tony K. Bambara that can be opened up for us. There's something about the Black world and the ways in which our ancestors created a world, as Terry-Ann Williamson writes, the Black feminist, that this world is as much a starting point as others. And so in expanding that canon, I want to work against these kind of pure narratives that says that we Black people have nothing to offer, and that, the white man's ways, their objectivity, quote unquote, is God's ways, and that to listen to them is to listen to the voice of God, and that to think the way they think is to be more human and more mature and more civilized. I don't think that works for any of us. And if anything, it's not something that would allow our children, our figurative and literal children, to be able to be free in ways that we know our ancestors often wanted and actually often achieved. So yeah, we got some work we got to do.
Yeah, indeed. And that leads me to my next question about this idea of Christianity sort of as the inherent goodness, or the thing that we should be striving to be more like Christ, or what have you, right? We talk about that a great deal, but we shrink when it's time to discuss the harm that Christianity is doing. So the manner in which it cements patriarchy, dehumanizes women, excuses violence, terrorizes LGBTQIA plus people, children, non-Christians, sex workers, etc. This may be too large a burden to ask of one man, but how do you think Christianity itself can atone for its harms? Can it?
I don't think it can. I really honestly, I don't think it can, because, when so much of your sense of your own moral superiority is dependent on your ideas of your own innocence, then you would do everything in your power to maintain your place of power in the world and in some sense, in people's stories.
And what did Baldwin say? Innocence is the crime.
Oh, innocence is the crime. Innocence is the crime. And not only is innocence the crime, the conduit with which that innocence is achieved is oftentimes linking God as justifying the violence to which we want to run from and oftentimes protect. You see it particularly especially as we're thinking about those who are LGBTQ, IA plus, we see it in this idea of, what's natural, what's quote unquote natural. We see it in the ways in which, people try and root these ideas of gender and sexuality and difference within the creative order and say, this is God's way. And things like that, not necessarily realizing that any ideas of our faith and tradition and theologies are always inherited into a context. And that thing, whatever you inherited, just like that game telephone, is oftentimes much different than when it came before. And I'm always reminded of this story, that Howard Thurman tells, or this line that he says that Christianity became the religion of the powerful and the oppressor should not make us think that this was intended in the mind of Jesus. And what Howard Thurman is not telling us to do is kind of run and evade that question. What I think Howard Thurman is trying to get us to do is to say that there are multiple traditions of Christianity, that there is no singular tradition of Christianity. And so you need to act correct. So when Donald Trump embodies the worst of my tradition, I can't just say Donald Trump is not a Christian, because Donald Trump very much has been given power by traditions of Christianity, either in their act of upholding him or their silence to him. I can't say R. Kelly is not a Christian because we sing his songs in church and we upholded him and we were silent when he was doing his dirty work. I can't say that these people are not Christian. Why? Because the church to which is mine and to which birthed me and to which gives me so much, I'm linked to that story, and I should not run from that. And I should realize also that Jesus does not protect either himself or us from that, but he does show us the possibility of better. And if I can, in some sense, try as best I can, lean into the possibility of better, the ways in which oftentimes that story is told that somebody is healing in the name of Jesus and the disciples griping because, hey, that person is not doing it our way. If I can say, okay, how do we critically examine those who believe they're closest to Jesus and those who are furthest away? And Jesus says that, that person who is not against us is for us. How can I lean on their story, realizing that oftentimes it's those who closest, who believe they're right, who are oftentimes the most who are harmful? How can I live in that tension and try and embody the best of our tradition, realizing that when we step out into the world, we can't atone for it. Oftentimes we can't make it right, but what we can do is try to learn better than many of the ways that we have inherited. And I think that is continuing the work as I exist in the Black church right now, as a minister. That is our continued work, is to embrace the terrible things that we know we can become. Monsters are real, as I write in one of my essays, and we become them oftentimes. Monsters are real, and we become them. And how can we, in some sense, resist them, but be honest about the ways in which we protect them and try and, hold out better for those whom we believe to be our neighbor. And in some sense, give them agency and autonomy to be their own people, to build their world and join them in that critical work that they're trying to accomplish, not as this kind of person above them, but as a fellow traveler alongside them. So I think we can't atone for it, but we can do a little bit better.
So then how would you as a Christian minister to somebody like, say, Dave Chappelle, who is popular because he is articulating something that the majority of people in this country anyway feel about a marginalized population like the transgender community? Life expectancy of transgender women is 35 or 33, same age Jesus was when he died, by the way, when he was killed, because they face so much violence from everybody. We are all implicated. And here you have a marginalized person in Dave Chappelle who says, I'm transphobic, I'm a TERF, all of these things, and says some really complicated and dastardly things about a population whose words can kill.
100%.
How do you minister to somebody like that?
Well, first and foremost, bro, I want to first minister to the person whom his words have harmed. I want to be with that person, because what was so instructive to me about that special that I watched, is that many of us watch, is that I walked away with the question, who does Dave Chappelle believe to be his people? Whom are punching down on.
Come on.
Because we need to always critique this idea of the other. As Toni Morrison writes in The Source of Self-Regard, when she talks about romanticizing slavery and these ideas of otherizing people, who do we believe to be our people? Who do we believe to be those in this story that he tells himself that is in need of him going and, in some sense, proselytizing other people to save? In his idea, it was the baby and Kevin Hart. In his idea, it was whiteness. So it was not even, the crazy part about this situation was he did not even think about black transgender folk In the end, the crescendo of his ideas of empathy were still bound to ideas of toxic masculinity, power, and whiteness. Black straight maleness as, in some sense, the full expression of that which he believes he needs to resurrect and that which he believes he's losing most. And so somebody like Dave Chappelle, I would, if I had an opportunity to talk with Dave Chappelle, first and foremost, I'd tell him that, bruh, you don't need a stage. You need to be in a seat with a therapist, number one. You got some things you need to work through. And the public is not a good place to deal with our problems. The public can reveal our problems. It can be the great revealer of our problems. The public can, in some sense, help us navigate the ways in which problems can be even more problematic when they get in public. But I don't think the healing to which we truly want to achieve, in some sense, can be solved in the public in ways that we can critically think about the ways in which what we embody and what we say harm other people. And in some sense, it's convenient for people like him to say, you know, let's move on, or to joke and be vindictive when the people who are marginalized, in some sense, you know, when you don't think the people who are marginalized and hurt are a part of the people who you want to be saved. And this is in some sense the problem with oftentimes, you know, the church, you know, in the ways in which we embody our faith in the world. And in some sense, the ways in which I embodied my faith, the ways I became problematic and the worst of us, is that I was led to believe that those who lose the most were not those who were most marginalized, but those who were most powerful and now held accountable. You know, and I think that it becomes dangerous and deadly work when, in some sense, we give the best of our empathy to those who hold the most of the power. You know, and it's an ironic thing that those in society oftentimes, what's so ironic is that those who are the most powerful in society are oftentimes those who believe they're experiencing the most pain. And in some sense, that becomes callous, that becomes dangerous, that becomes deadly, because most people identify with them because they represent that which we believe we have been losing the whole time. And it's our self-worth and self-respect. And I'm reminded of June Jordan in her book, Some of Us Did Not Die. She has this essay, Where is the Love? And she says, I am a feminist. And that means as much as it means to me that I am Black. And this is what she says, that my ability to love myself and respect, I need to love myself, I meant to say, and respect myself as if everything depended on my ability to have self-love and self-respect. And somebody like Dave Chappelle, in his situation, his people, his ideas of self-love and self-respect is not expansive enough. It does not include people who are actually marginalized, but it works to solidify those who are powerful. And that's a sad, sad place to be when somebody who's hurt and is hurting tells you that they're hurt, that Clifford is a powerful Black man in his story, as he tells in his joke, his idea of Clifford, that it doesn't, when you shoot him, it doesn't hurt, but it does break his heart. And he's right there. That metaphor is powerful. That's a powerful metaphor that, you know, somebody, you may not kill them, but you sure do shatter their heart and you break their heart in a million pieces. But sadly, his idea of those whose heart are broken are not those who exist at the margins of love and humanity and liberation and being silenced and made invisible, but those who haven't been made to be held accountable for the ways they abuse their power. And that's a sad, sad thing.
We have a question from Paula. Paula says, what you point out about racism by white people in religion reminds of the racism of white feminism as pointed out by some BIPOC female writers. Would you agree with that comparison?
Hold on, repeat that question so I can kind of think through that real quick.
So it's sort of like where you were talking about white evangelical and how racism and white supremacy are practiced in those spaces.
Yeah.
she's comparing that to the way in which Black and brown female writers talk about racism in white feminist spaces. Do you see a comparison between those things?
Yeah. And I think the great common denominator is whiteness. Whether you're white conservative or white progressive, at the end of the day, one of the things I've learned about white people in this country is that white people in general, many white people are more concerned about protecting the world that their children will inherit rather than dismantling a world that will harm ours. And that's the common denominator that most people, go ahead.
And the irony or the mind-boggling part of it is that they're not even willing to protect the world for their own children because they're destroying the world.
Oh, without question, 100%.
So they want children as a means to keep the hoarded wealth in the family, so to speak. But they don't really see those children as children. They see them as devices.
Oh, without question.
And it's mind-boggling to me that you could shut yourself off from your own humanity. And I think that's what whiteness does to a person, is it shuts them off from their own humanity. It is the button that turns off humanity so that you could accomplish whatever goals. I think about Christopher Columbus, who, when he first encountered indigenous people, they were so kind to him. They fed him and they welcomed him. And his letter to the king and queen of Spain was, I just need 100 men to destroy all of them. Like it's the button that turns it off. So when Baldwin said, as long as you think you're white, then I'm forced to think I'm Black. What he was trying to say is, this is not what race is about. Race is up here. And as long as you think of yourself as a white person, what you're saying in a sense is, I'm superior than any other species on this planet, any other person on this planet. And that gives me the right to destroy.
100%.
So you have to dial the knob back to humanity.
100%.
Otherwise, destruction is the only outcome. And what it seems like when I watch them storming the Capitol and all of these things, destruction is what they want.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And I think this is why, for me, that I wrote the book the way that I wrote it, that I wanted to craft it the way that I crafted, is I wanted to write a book that made it incredibly hard to say that this, as it is conceived, particularly in this moment, that this is anti-racist text. And I'm not here to dog, that type of literature, but I'm talking about the ways in which what white people have done to our literature as a means of exploitation, just simply to educate white people to become more moral, more Christian, more humane, and better. And like, for me, that's why I think, whether you're in white evangelical spaces or white progressive, white feminist spaces, that's why I think, in some sense, just like the womanists of earlier, like, we have to create literature that makes us feel seen, inspired, loved, and protected. That, as Elizabeth Alexander writes in The Black Interior, we need to envision what we were not meant to envision: complex Black selves, real and enactable Black power, beautiful and unfetishized, Black beauty. We need to envision that which loves us and heals us and makes us whole and liberates us. I don't want our books and our art and our creativity just simply to be like, hey, white people, we are human and we deserve better from you. I want our work and our creativity to do what June Jordan says in her poem, Who Look at Me, at the end, where she crescendos, I am Black alive and looking back at you. That's what I want for us. Not I am Black alive here to teach you, but I am Black alive looking back at you.
Have mercy. Dante, thank you so very much for this sermon, because that's what this was to me. This was a sermon. And I want to say also thank you to Paula and Zach at Book Passage for granting us this space to have this conversation. I hope people tune into this and listen. I hope people buy your book, Shoutin' in the Fire, An American Epistle, available at Book Passage or your favorite local independent bookseller. Please support your local independent bookstores. They are our keepers of knowledge, our keepers of culture, and we love them so much. And Dante, thank you so much again, brother. This was so enlightening.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you all. I hope y'all enjoyed it and hope you keep up.
Thank you to you both. Not only are you both incredible observers, thinkers, and writers, you are truly poignant and powerful speakers. And I hope this is one of many events we'll have you together and separately, because I think you're both going to be putting out such good material. I think it's amazing that for both of you, this was your debut year. And it's so special. I'm glad you got to celebrate that together. Robert, thank you for bringing Dante to our attention. On behalf of Book Passage and our audience, we love you. We appreciate you, both of you. Continued success for you both with your respective books. And audience members, we have both of their books at the store. You can come in person, San Francisco, Corte Madera, or you can order online or give us a call, and one of our knowledgeable booksellers will help you out. But if you have not read The Prophets, trust me, it's going to be on your top 10 fiction books. And now Dante's Shoutin in the Fire, nonfiction, both making top 10 for me.
Wonderful.
And thank you, audience.